What was life like growing up in the southern Illinois town of Collinsville?
Man, it was kind of like a semi-rural upbringing. A lot of uh, chomp around in the woods, enjoying nature. Of course, it was the '80s, so we had Nintendos, I guess, so we weren't sitting inside playing video games all day. That lost its luster pretty quick, and you had to go out and do stuff. Hunting and fishing, uh, getting in fights with other kids, going to school, all that kind of stuff. And then, man, from there, it's one of these towns. There's not a lot going on. There's like a steel factory and a community college, and so you get to kind of pick what you're going to do. I had no idea what was going on, so I was dead set on going in the military, and I figured I'd at least get 4 years. I knew I wasn't going to college because my grades were terrible, and so I figured, I'd have a job for 4 years. I'd go learn something, go see some stuff, and then I'd be able to figure out what I wanted to do with my life perhaps after that. So that's kind of like my little origin story, I guess, as far as growing up and trying to make the transition into adulthood in a Midwest town, I guess. Oh yeah, thank you.
You served in the military?
The United States Army. Hoo-ah. Yep.
What can you tell us about your time in the Army?
Uh, I don't know, man. So first thing, so I went in about '95, right? So this is the Clinton Army. It was understaffed and overused, and I drew first assignment in Korea. And well, I had originally drew on my first assignment for Europe, and I was very excited because I had a friend from high school who was an exchange student who lived over in, I mean, he was Swiss, right? And I thought, wow, if I'm going to Europe, this is great. I'll be able to reconnect with this friend and everything. And so orders changed, went to Korea, and I learned a lot in Korea. It was really interesting being over there as far as, being in that different culture. Total shocker for, freaking bonehead uh 18-year-old kid that doesn't know anything. And but then I still wanted to go to Europe, and so I put in for that and did get assigned to that. So I spent the first 4 years of my adult life outside of the country, and it was almost like a weird culture shock when I returned to Illinois. So I mean, I guess that'd be the thing, and it's a lot of my libertarian roots kind of come from that as well. Being in the military, you see a lot of ways that government programs are just not what you might think they are, and then the other thing is the sort of the arbitrary nature of authority, and so you get to live that 24/7 for the duration of your contract. So that was kind of interesting, but I don't know if there's anything else neat in there, but
What do you mean by understaffed and overused?
understaffed and overused. Yeah, so yeah, the Clinton Army. I mean, they were basically running about 80% manpower, but the op tempo was still at 100% for the time. I might add. Of course, the deployment tempo picked up significantly when George W. Bush came into power. But the unit that I was in Europe was deployed to Bosnia. That was a big thing. Kosovo was popping off during that time. The bombing of the Kobar towers. That stuff was all going on when I was in. So it was kind of like the build up to 9/11, but they were opting people out of the Air Force, canceling their contracts, downsizing, and I was in a signal unit in the Army, and we were supposed to have 6 people on a team, and we'd have 4. And when you got to put up a signal site, you have the same amount of aluminum and steel to haul around and get your antennas in the air and your ground rods in the ground, but you don't have 75% of your manpower. So it was a little bit of a challenge, really. And that's we had a lot of people with injuries, and if you look at I think if you could find statistics on it, I think you'll see there were a lot of training casualties in the '90s, and I think a lot of that is attributable to the way Clinton staffed the military during that time. So yeah, training casualty. I mean, no casualty is a good casualty, but I mean, gosh, to get hurt or killed in training, that's really bad.
What are you passionate about?
Well, I'd say I'm passionate about what I would say is my sort of definition of freedom. I guess is that we can have self determination, we can have a right to privacy, a right to property, the ability to engage in commerce, engage in the marketplace, and kind of set our own way. And what stands in opposition to that is, of course, I mean, we live in a country that has the most powerful government that's ever existed in the history of the world. It's enormous. It soaks up enormous wealth from the country, and of course, they engage in all kinds of uh, abrogations of our freedoms, as far as spying on us, uh, stealing property outright through like asset forfeiture, and you know, putting people in prison for victimless crimes. And when we talk about victimless crimes, you could say, well, drug use and prostitution and those types of things. There are, in fact, collateral damage from those, and I don't disagree. And these aren't things that I personally want to engage in, and things that I don't personally condone. But at the same time, I think you'll see that there are other outside factors that outright prohibition just isn't taken into consideration. So it's just sort of that thing. It's the government purports to try to solve problems, but in actuality, they either directly cause or for sure directly exacerbate problems in the society that would still exist if we had total freedom, but I don't think they would exist to the extent that they do today under the oppressive state that we live in. So that's a long-winded answer to say I don't know. I like freedom. Yeah.
You ran for a seat on the board of a local park district that was filled with corruption, and was basically being used as a way to bail out local politicians from being held responsible for their bad actions. What can you tell us about that?
Okay. So while I tell this story, I want to be very careful not to take credit for the eventual outcomes that are much larger than myself or my inputs, I should say. But so here in Illinois, man, we've got the more layers of government than any other state, and in fact, we also pay higher property taxes than any other state. And there are people that want to try to claim that New Jersey's property taxes are higher, and I don't want to talk bad about, but it's like two counties in New Jersey that have higher property taxes than we have here in Illinois. So it's really kind of a misnomer. So one of the things that I pay attention to is how the local bodies of government are spending my money that they extract from us, forcibly, because we're forced to pay these property taxes, otherwise we'll lose our property. So there was this park district. Illinois has a level of government called a special recreation district. And the special recreation district in the area where I live had just gone off the rails. They were borrowing up all kinds of money, they were engaging in long term bonds, and they were using these bonds to buy assets that were A, not worth what they were paying for them. And then B, there was other money that was being hidden in these bonds that were used for operational costs. So if you can imagine, they went out and they bought around 2006, 2007, the board approved this deal to buy this golf course that had gone into bankruptcy. This is where the bailout aspect comes in, because they paid $5 million for this course. The course they were trying to sell the course prior to the bankruptcy proceedings for 2.5 million, and they weren't getting any buyers. Okay, and so the park district swoops in. They said, "Yeah, we would like to have a course. We'll pay 5 million for it because we think that that's what the judge will accept," and of course the judge would. And that made all the creditors whole. And then that so we're bailing out the creditors. I mean, I'm sorry, guys, you guys invested in a course that ain't worth that much, right? So everybody's taking a bath. That's the way it is. So they did that, and then they bonded up like 3 million other dollars for like equipment to maintain the course, and then also they were doing some repairs to a water park that they already had, and they were paying for some operational overhead that they were kind of hiding in the budget. Well, they're doing this with long-term debt. The taxpayer is on the hook to pay for these things, right? So they're operating this golf course at a loss, not even considering the debt payments themselves. And they're operating their water park at a loss. And so the community is, subsidizing people to play golf. I mean, I don't like that. And at the same time, the city over here, city, separate level of government, they had gotten into $50 million worth of debt as well. So this small community of about 35,000 people has $80 million in long-term municipal debt, which is just, to me, just seems outrageous. And so there were some people who were fighting against this, and they were going down to the board and they were making some noise and saying, we don't accept these things and you guys got to straighten up, using the public comment period to let the board know that these actions were unacceptable. But the board still just kind of continued to listen to the bond attorneys. They gotten into this scheme where they couldn't use direct taxation to pay for these bonds. And this is getting real technical, and I'm sorry I'm going down like a real procedural thing here. But the bonds were structured in such a way that the term said you couldn't levy a tax directly against them. So what they would do is, since they weren't bringing in enough money to pay the bond, they would abate the taxes for year one, and then in year two, they would issue a short-term 1-year bond. That 1-year bond, when the revenue came in from that, it would go to make the bond payment the following year for the long-term bond. Then they would levy taxes against that short-term bond. Well, so you're already paying interest on your long-term debt, right? That doesn't go away. Short-term debt, as we know, the interest rate is higher. Okay. Then there's also fees associated with this. You can imagine if you were to refinance your mortgage every single year, right? You're going to just run up fees constantly. Okay. So the fees, as far as the issuance and the marketing and the debt service, which is the interest rate, all added up to be about 10% on top of what the money was. So if you got to make a $1 million payment on your long-term debt, they're racking up $1.1 million in expenses in order to do that. And so there's a couple ways to get around that. And the number one way was to simply stop doing it, which would violate the terms of the long-term debt. But once you violate the terms, that ship has sailed and you can start taxing directly against it. And that's ultimately what the board did once I got on, and we had the votes to do so. They thought they had the votes previously because they had some good fiscal conservatives, engaging in that. But one of the guys bailed, and that's when one of the board members came to me and said, "Hey, we need somebody principled on this board. We think we can rely on you. We think you should run for it." And that's what got me directly involved. I mean, I was tracking the issue prior to that, and yeah. So I mean, I ran for it. I ran unopposed, and so I just kind of slid into the office. And once I was in there, we had a board of 5-member board, 5 people that were principled and against all this spending, and we just started going to work. We cut the levy, we streamlined things, we outsourced management of the golf course and saved a bunch of money there. Made improvements to the water park that brought in more money and for less revenue. So we were cutting those taxes, and then it came time to actually downsize the district. So certain properties owners were coming into the district and saying we want out of the district. There's a legal mechanism for that. And once a few people started to do that, and of course we're approving it because I mean you come to me with a petition and you say I don't want to be part of this anymore. Well, if I say, no, that's too bad. You have to be part of this. Well, then that's not government by consent, right? So, and the other board members were on board as well. So we were voting for this. Well, then it's starting to look like, uh-oh, we have all these expenses and the district is shrinking. So if we don't end this thing, whoever gets out last is going to be stuck holding the bag. And so that started a whole thing to actually get rid of the recreation district. And so there was a guy who's kind of a local Republican who was heading it up, but the people on the board and a lot of people in the community were helping with this. And we collected a bunch of signatures, we put it on the ballot, and you wouldn't believe this, Illinois with its massive governments and all this spending, 80% of the voters were in favor of getting rid of the district. So at some point, it became unpopular to have this thing around, and so we were victorious there. And one less taxing body that can issue bonds against your property. So check the box. Good to go.
After getting on the board 4 years ago, you led an effort to sell off the land, eliminate the liabilities, and dissolve the municipality. What happened? How did you do that?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to take credit for any of this. I was part of it. So we had a couple guys who'd been studying this issue as well, and a lot of the legal pathways. So this is a thing. If your viewers are kind of into this kind of thing and they want to take action, in their local communities, you have to know what the statutes say about what's even possible, and then you can use those laws to help guide your way forward. But we had a guy who knew the laws very well, and he helped to kind of put the blueprint together. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. No. I just don't want to say like I got rid of this park district because I didn't. I mean, there were dozens of people involved, and it's just a sticking point for me to try to to try to aggrandize myself in that way. So yeah, yeah, yeah.
The story doesn't end there, does it?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, you correctly identified that the story doesn't end there, right? So the golf course is still there, the water park is still there. What actually ended up happening was the board had to, once the dissolution vote was approved, the board had to go in and close up all the affairs of the district, and which includes paying off the long-term debt, which that's going to take until 2032. But it also involves handling the assets. So there was a water park, there was a heritage farm in the middle of town. Uh, there was another park up in the next town called Maryville. Those had to be divvied out, right? So Maryville got the park that's in Maryville. And Maryville, this is a weird thing about Maryville, they already have a park district. Or, I'm sorry, a recreation department. And they had a couple of parks of their own that were outside. They were geographically they were in the park district that we were maintaining, but they were maintained by the city or the village of Maryville. And then we gave other things over to the city of Collinsville. We were very careful with the golf course because we specifically didn't want the city of Collinsville to get the golf course. They got the water park and the heritage farm, and another park that we owned up in the north end of town. But the golf course we had leased. One of the ways we saved a bunch of money was we leased it out to an outside firm, and they immediately cut the expenses by like it was like 27% or something. Just the fact that they don't have to pay for pensions, and they reduced their staffing a little bit, and they actually hired the guy who was running it anyway as their golf pro, and gave him a pretty good deal. But just getting him off the rolls saved like 100. Just getting all that stuff off the roll saved about $100,000 a year, and made it profitable. But we sold the golf course to the guy who was running it, and so he's got all that, and it's no longer a municipal course, which personally I like. I don't like this idea of municipal courses. I mean, if people pay good money to golf. There's no reason that governments should provide golf for people. It's not like nobody out there wants to run a golf course. You know what I mean? So yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I'm reasonably sure he didn't up his greens fees or anything either. I mean, you can go there, you'd never know it changed hands other than the fact that the name is different. Yeah.
You are now running for a seat on the Collinsville Township Board, and you plan to hold them accountable too. How will you do that?
Yeah, that's correct. So we're hot and heavy into that. That election's 6 weeks away, and the township board, it's another one where I wouldn't describe it as being completely off the rails in the way this park district was, but also they don't have the quite the ability to borrow money like a school district or a park district does in the township, because their three core functions are maintaining the township roads, running the public assistance fund, and running the assessor's office. But so this is another district where one of the guys that was involved in the dissolution of the park district is on that board, and so we've seen a lot of what goes on. And there's bloat, right? I mean, the streets department is way bigger than it should be, and like they've got a car wash. I don't know, in the military I'd call it a wash rack, big rack where you wash your heavy equipment, right? They have like two trucks, and they've got this giant wash rack that they paid like $500,000 for, and they've got a big fancy building and everything, and they've got a bunch of employees, and we're paying 2.5 times what the next township to the north is paying if you look on a per mile basis. And so it's those types of things that motivate us to say, hey, somebody needs to get in there and look at this stuff and be able to vote and tell the highway commissioner, hey, your budget's inflated, and tell the assessor's office is the same thing. uh, they've got an assessor's office up at the county, which is a weird thing, right? You have to pay property taxes for these guys to come out and assess your property so that they can charge you property taxes. It's kind of like a self-licking ice cream cone. But but we talked to the county and said, hey, you guys have an assessor's office. They got 5 assessors in this office, and it costs about $500,000 a year. What do you guys charge us to do the same function for the homes in the township? And they said, it's like 215,000 or 220 or whatever, and that'll pay for two guys' time and doing everything, maintain everything. It's like, well, okay, well, we can cut that budget in half right there, right? If we do that. And so if we had the votes on the board, you go to the assessor and you go, hey man, uh, here's a figure we'd like you to meet. If you don't like it, we're done here. You know, we're gonna go get somebody else to do this, and then effectively eliminate a whole office, of the township. And then the same thing with the streets department. We can do the research with surrounding townships and go, hey, here's what these guys are charging. What are you guys doing? That's so great that we're paying 2.5x over these guys over everybody else. Make them justify it and see if we can lower people's property tax levy. So, and the township's only 7.5% of the property tax bill. I mean, of course, the lion's share in any community is going to go into the schools. Um, but 7.5%, there's still something there. I mean, if you cut it in half, that's still a 3% reduction in your taxes. So it's not zero, right? Yep. Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, if you look at the 2020 election, it's I heard Spike Cohen, he was on that ticket. I heard him say that people are going around bragging about finishing third, and man, it's a distant third. It's like saying you know some team was finished third for the Super Bowl. Well, that doesn't mean nothing. I mean, you weren't even in the game, right? So I don't know. I've been I've been on that train for a while, working with the Libertarian Party and trying to promote their candidates and everything. And I'm really of the mind right now that's just completely not how we're going to win. We're going to win locally, and the thing is going to be having coalitions locally in your communities to address the problems that are surround you. And I don't know if your listeners would be familiar with a guy named Brian McClanahan. I think he's from South Carolina, as a matter of fact. But he's got this tagline for his podcast, which is "Think locally, act locally," and I couldn't agree with that more. And like in my area of Illinois, our big issue here is property taxes. So I try to I try to associate myself and talk like what you might call a fiscal conservative. I don't know if that terminology is going by the wayside, but if I lived in Portland, Oregon, maybe I would be talking about decriminalization. There's a movement called Decriminalized Nature that's kind of sweeping the country. And if I was involved with that, I'd use my associations differently. My coalitions would be different when you look at the political spectrum. But I'm still out there trying to get the same principles applied. It's just that the difference is who is on my side on a given issue. And so, if you got people watching this and they're thinking, "Hey, I need more freedom in my area," we got big issues to tackle. It's sort of that lens that you got to look through and say, who are my allies on this, and what sort of direction do I need to take, and associate and build a coalition to attack this issue. And then, you know, who's standing in our way? Is it the city council or is it the county? If it's the state, in my opinion, I feel like that becomes more difficult for the libertarian to actually have any kind of influence over the state at the state level. But that's where, man, you get into the 10th Amendment Center and the model legislation that they have, and they've had a ton of success, getting nullification type bills passed to the state level. But yeah, I mean, to me, local is key. All politics is local. I think that's a catchphrase that people are saying, and if we embrace that, I think we'll see some real change in this country. Now, I don't know how that addresses things like the surveillance state, but you know what I mean. Sometimes you got to pick your battles. I don't think I'm going to take down the NSA anytime soon. So, you know what I mean.
What else would you like to share?
Well, I don't know. Um, let's see. I'll plug something, I guess. If your listeners, like what I'm on about here, think I got a good message, want to see me, do some damage on the township board, or if they just want to see some marginally, marginally produced political advertisements, go over to my Facebook page, Aaron Wright for Collinsville Township. You should be able to search that up and find it. Follow me on Facebook. All my posts are public. I just put everything out there. I'll engage with anybody. Don't care. Aaron M. Wright on Twitter. I don't do a ton there, but I'll post up things every now and then. Yeah, I don't know, man. I think we got interesting times coming up. I think with this COVID stuff. I don't want to get into a bunch of like conspiracy things, but I'm firmly of the opinion that things like mask mandates, and I think mask mandates is going to expand into something else. We're already seeing in Israel, they're having vaccination verification that's going to be required to go to public events and stuff. I'm kind of watching for that stuff to come here. I don't see why it's not going to. So I think people should keep an eye out for that. And places like Tennessee, they're passing laws at the state level to try to make those mandates if they come from the federal government, make them illegal in Tennessee. Maybe we might need to see some more of that at the state level in other areas. And if not, everybody's gonna be moving to Tennessee. So learn to cook cornbread before you go there. You don't want to ruin the culture. So yeah, I don't know, sir. That's all I got. You got any?